This week's guest, RaeAnne Thayne, is the author of over 60 books, including The Path to Sunshine Cove. Here she talks about one of her favorite things about writing.
Absolutely a magical part of it, that the story comes alive at some point. The characters really come alive and make their own decisions that make so much more sense than maybe what I planned for them.
Welcome to Writer's Voices with Monica and Caroline. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me is my co-host and mother, Caroline Kilborn.
Good morning, everyone, or what time of day it is that finds you.
Whatever time it is, yep. That's the Mom has a long history in live radio, so when she was talking is when you were hearing. And did they ever even rerun shows back then, or was everything live?
Back when?
Back when you were on the radio. Like every day.
Was live. Everything was live.
Everything
was live. If you made a mistake, too bad.
So, Mom, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce to you RaeAnne Thayne, and she is a fantastic author. She has written so many books. I'm anxious to read some more of them. She finds inspiration in the beautiful northern Utah mountains, where the New York Times and USA Today bestseller author lives with her husband and 3 children. Her books have won numerous honors, including RITA Award nominations from Romance Writers of America and a Career Achievement Award from RT Book Reviews. She loves to hear from readers, and so she's going to hear from a couple today, from Monica and I. And this was a very interesting book, and I enjoyed it a lot. I really did.
Thank you.
Welcome to Writer's Voices, RaeAnne Thayne.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So what book number is this? The Path to Sunshine Cove.
I think after about 50, you sort of lose track, but I think that one was 65 because I just finished 67, and I did 2 more after that one. So I think that one is 65.
And how long?
That is amazing.
It is. How long have you been doing this?
31 years, basically. I started when I was actually a newspaper reporter and editor, and I was on maternity leave with our oldest daughter, who will be 31 in June. And so I thought, well, I'm never going to have a block of time when I'm not working and juggling children. So I'm just juggling this baby right now, and when she naps, I'll try to write some of these ideas that have been sort of in my head for a long time. So I sat down when she was just born and started, and they were awful, the ideas that I wrote down. I didn't know what I was doing, but I worked at it and studied and, read a lot of books. I never took a class. I read a lot of books about fiction writing, and I knew how to tell a story from my years in journalism, and so it took me about 5 years after we had her to sell my first book, and that was in 95, I want to say. It came out in 96, and I've been just doing it ever since. And, if you write 2 or 3 books a year for all those years, you end up with a pretty healthy backlist.
Well, there's so many things that are impressive about that story. I don't even know where to start. But the first is that you start writing with a newborn. I mean, come on. You're making the rest of us look pretty bad here.
Yeah, well, I was very idealistic, thinking I would have all this time. But, when you do have a baby, you have time to think. And where I started work immediately after college, and so I'd always had something else occupying my time. And I did have this new baby, but you have a lot of time to think when you're caregiving with children. And so I didn't have a lot of time to write, except when she was napping or when my husband was there with her or whatever. But I did have a lot of time to think and come up with ideas and plot stories and things like that. And so I basically just, for the first time in my life, had 6 weeks with space to just sort of dream about things. And so that's sort of where it started. But again, and then I think my motivation after I had her was that I loved my job in newspapers, but I wanted to do something a little more flexible so I could be home with her a little bit more often instead of having the demands of my newspaper career. And by that time, I'd been in newspapers for about 3 years, and besides my college time working at a newspaper and a community newspaper in college. And I kind of was getting to realize that was not the career for me, that as much as I love telling stories, I did not like the contention and the conflict that came with being a journalist and having people mad at me all the time and things like that. That's kind of an inevitable part of the job there. And I liked stories that made people feel good and that they could be happy at the end of the day when they were reading them. That was sort of a better fit for my personality. So it was a logical extension of that for me to write stories about happy endings and about people overcoming their problems and learning to find joy in life.
That's a beautiful thing, and you certainly have reached that, I would say, with this book, and I'm sure with all the rest of them, too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So the Path to Sunshine Cove is part of a series? Is that?
It is technically, but not really. I mean, I've written series that are much more interconnected, but this one was sort of an organic series that I wrote the first one, which was called The Cliff House, set in this basically this fictional California coastal community, and that was my first hardcover. It came out in 2 years ago, I guess. And then when I was writing the second hardcover, I thought I still wanted a coastal community, something on the shore, and so I talked to my publisher and said, "Can I just set this in the same little town?" So that book was called The Sea Glass Cottage, and then this one is the third one. And since I'd already created this community, I just thought, well, it makes sense to just stay there. But each book is totally standalone. I don't even refer to the other characters. I mean, there might be very, very vague references in each book where I might mention one character's name, but it's kind of more of as an Easter egg than as a real character, in the story. Just for readers who've read the other ones who say, "Hey, I remember who that is." But I like doing it that way because each book can totally stand alone. Each book is not connected to the other one. Readers can jump in at any point and not feel lost just because there's not any kind of through line through this series. I have done those in the past where there is a through line that you really should start with the first one in order to understand some of the back history, but this is not the case.
When you start with a book, do you have an outline? Do you know what's going to happen, or do you make it up as you go along?
Kind of, but mostly I plot, and I think that came from those early days of being a mom and having limited time to write. We had our oldest daughter, and then we had two more, and our second son has severe disabilities. So I've done a lot of caregiving as I've had to write as well. And so in those moments, that's sort of where I think and plan and plot while I'm taking care of kids. And so my process is basically I come up with the idea and I keep a running list of ideas. And in this particular case, for the Path to Sunshine Cove, I thought I heard a radio ad about a company that helps senior citizens or people who are needing to transition from a home to a smaller living space, an apartment or something like that. And I got the idea that would be a great job for somebody who wanted to travel around the country. And so I had that idea. I also had an idea of maybe two sisters who had experienced trauma in their childhood and how they dealt with it very differently and had to sort of reconcile those differences as adults. And so as I was coming up with an idea, I looked at those two things and tried to figure out how can I fit those together. And then I just sit there and think and try to come up with the characters, and that's kind of where every story starts for me. It's all about the characters and their, what they need to, how they need to grow from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and where they need to, the process that might take me there. And then I write a very rough introduction outline thing, and I'm lucky enough that I have a plot group, and it's other authors. There's 4 of us right now, and we get together in person when we can. And in this particular case, we met in early February of 2020, and we're lucky enough to go to California, to a beach house in California, to plot our books. And then the shutdown happened just a few weeks after that, or not long after that. So they basically, I get 4 hours of that time that we're together, and we just plot the book. And I just say, this is where the character is at the beginning. This is where I need her to be at the end. What are some ideas that we can get there? And they're super helpful for helping me, figure out the turning points in the book and figure out, dark moments and that sort of thing for each each different area of the plot. Like in this particular book, as you know, 'cause as you've read it, there's a main character, and her name is Jess, and then she's got a sister, Rachel, who also has a storyline. So I really had to plot each one of those storylines independently and come up with those turning points. And then also there's a relationship that Rachel's dealing with her husband, and then the relationship with Jess and Nate, kind of the romance area there. But then I had a plot line with the two sisters and how they come together and sort of are able to find new peace and joy and build the relationship a little bit better than it has been for a few years. And so I do like to plot. Back to your original question, sorry I got a little long-winded in my answer there. I do plot, and I need to plot just because my writing time is somewhat limited, and so it very much helps me if I can know when I sit down to write, where am I going to be? And if you'd like to know the particulars of how I do that, I actually I plot every scene. I know what's going to happen in that scene, whose point of view it's going to be in, and what significant points in the book need to come out in that scene. I write everyone on an index card, and I use an app for that, but then I can move those cards around if I decide I like a different order, or I need to make sure that, I've been in this character's head too long and I need to bring in another character's point of view or whatever. I can see that very clearly on this index card system that I use.
So it's a virtual index card, basically?
Yeah, it's on my iPad, and it's actually, the app is called Index Card, and I like it because, you can have different colored cards for every character, so that you, like, if in this book I had 3 points of view. I had Jess, I had Nate, and I had Rachel, and each one of them had a different color card, and so every one of their scenes would be written out that way. And it helps me stay on track when you're writing a book that's got multiple threads in it. Sometimes you can get really off track, and it's hard to bring it all back. But if I can see it that way, it really does help me to organize my thoughts. But I should say that as hard as I plot, as much time as I put in ahead of time thinking of the book and trying to come up with things, my characters always surprise me. There's never been a book that turns out like I plan it. There's always some diversion. As you're writing, that's part of the process. But the characters come up with things that you'd never imagine, and that I don't think of until I really get to know those people as I'm writing the story. So I love that magic. It's just absolutely a magical part of it, that the story comes alive at some point. The characters really come alive and make their own decisions that make so much more sense than maybe what I planned for them.
Well, that's interesting. Do you think there are many authors that meet with other authors to do this? I don't think anyone's ever told us that before that we've interviewed. Is that a common thing?
I do think it's common. I would say particularly in romance, where my books are not just romance. There's certainly deeper things to them, but I started out writing strictly romance, and I think where the readers are so voracious and they want a lot of books from the authors, and so many romance authors who get to a certain level have been around for a long time, have written a lot of books, and so it helps to have somebody else's perspective. You get in your own little track and think, well, this is the way they have to solve this problem, and that's what's got to happen, but sometimes when you're plotting with other people, they have a totally different life experience and a totally different perspective, and they can offer things for your characters that you would never come up with yourself. And I had like one particular experience where I was plotting, and the person I was plotting with is brilliant at it, and I would love to plot every single book with her because she's so good at it. But I had a situation where, a long story, but the main character ended up taking these 2 little boys in as an emergency foster situation. Their mother disappeared, and so she took these 2 little boys, and I wanted the story to end up with her taking them forever. But my plot partner at the time, she said, no, she's got to lose these 2 little boys at the end. They've got to go with family or something else, because that's what she needs for her character arc. And my own instinctive thing is to say, no, she needs this happy ever after with the boys. But the book was so much more rich and full because someone else had offered a different perspective to me that I wouldn't have come up with on my own.
That's great that you're able to share with other authors. That's really tremendous, I think.
How did you find or build this plot group?
Well, the main person that I plot with is my dearest writing friend, and we've been forever. we've been together, friends forever. We started out around the same time in 96, 97 at the same publisher, and we knew each other then, but it was really 15 years later that we sort of reconnected and became more plot buddies. And you do have to find people that you trust and people that you're writing. We each bring something different to the table. My books, I tend to focus really on the emotion, and my friend who plots with me, she's very much about the humor and about the plotting. I'm about the characters and the emotion. She's about more of the situation and the plotting. And so it's very helpful that we bring that to each other. I help make her characters a little more rich and bring the emotion out, and she helps me focus on the plot a little bit more. And then we had just a friend of hers who also had a friend, and that's sort of how we connected. And I've plotted with a couple of different people at various times, and all of them have been amazingly helpful. But mostly after you've been in the business for a long time, you sort of make these connections at the writers' conferences we used to have, which I hope we one day will have again. And you become email friends through the years and things like that. And when like several of us have written for the same publishers, and so we do events together and things like that, and you just form friendships. For people who all of us have been in the business for a long time, all of us have sort of experienced a lot of the same things, and our careers have followed similar tracks, not exactly the same, but similar tracks. And so that does help a lot to bring some of those shared experiences to the table.
Now, have you stayed with the same publisher your whole career?
All except my first 5 books. So I originally wrote for Bantam. They had a romance line, and I wrote for them. And then I wanted to write for 2 publishers, so I submitted. I had an agent who submitted to Silhouette, just because at that time I had quit writing. I had quit my newspaper job, and I needed more income than I could get, with one publisher. And so I basically just wanted to write more books, basically was the gist of it. And my agent at the time hooked me up with an editor who was working for, at the time it was Silhouette, and they eventually merged into Harlequin and just became Harlequin. But my editor has been my editor for 65 of the 67, or no, I guess it'd be 63 of the 67 books I've written. So I wrote a few for Love Swept, and then ended up writing all the rest for Harlequin Silhouette.
I wondered, because it says the publisher's HQN, I'm like, I bet that's Harlequin.
It is. So it's their single title line, yes. So they have Harlequin has their romances that come out every month that are, that are similar in appearance and things, but then they also have single title lines that are more about the author than about the line, and so that's the line that I've been writing for. They're bigger books, they're more complex, and that sort of thing.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline. Our guest today is RaeAnne Thayne, and she is the author of, among many other books, The Path to Sunshine Cove. How do you keep from repeating yourself when you're writing 2 to 3 books a year?
Well, it is very much a factor, I think, of having that's one of the reasons we started the plot group, because we didn't want to do that. I want to bring something fresh and new to every book that I write. With that said, I have to say that I do have consistent themes. I think I have a core story that tends to come through in every book, and I write it in different ways, but it comes back to the core story that we're all here to learn how to take care of each other. So I usually have a character who tries to be pretty isolated for various reasons, and they have to learn that, life is much more full and rich when you let other people in and when you learn how to care about other people. And I wouldn't say that happens in every single book, but that is a consistent theme. I think just because of my life experience, having a child with disabilities, we've had to really rely on a village, basically, and they've all been there to help us. And so that does come through in my writing. But I just try with every book to make it different, to make the characters feel fresh. And I have to say, if I'm bored with the characters, then I know my readers are going to be too. And so that, again, comes out in the planning process, where I have to say, what can I bring different that I haven't done before? And I think that is part of the reason why it seems harder. Every book seems harder than the one before. You'd think that after so many books it would feel easier, but my friends and I talk about, we picked the low-hanging fruit when we were first starting out as writers, and now we have to dig deeper into those emotions and bring, our own life experiences as we have aged and our experiences have changed. I think our books have certainly become more rich and more nuanced than they were before.
So you always know when you start out then kind of how it's going to develop, how the ending will be. The characters may change, but they're still basically, what's going to happen, right?
Yes, for the most part. Sometimes the ending is a little bit elusive. I know that there's going to be a happy ending, but I don't always know quite how they're going to get there or what exactly the details of it. I have friends who won't start writing a book until they know exactly the ending, and I have friends who sometimes write the ending first. That's not the way that I work. I have to do it in a linear fashion. I have to start at the beginning and work my way to the end, or else I don't really feel like I know those characters until, that point. I don't want to write the end until I know those characters. In fact, I do multiple drafts of my books. There's about 3 to 4 drafts. And sometimes I will leave the end, even after I finish the first draft, I won't have quite the ending down, because I still feel like I need to go through that second draft to know these people a little bit better, to know just what they would say and how they would respond. I know it's going to be a happy ending. I'm always going to write a book that has a happy ending. That's just me. That's my personality. That's the book I like to read. I know happy endings aren't always there in life, but in my books they are. So I kind of feel like that's my readers know when they pick up my book that at the end they're going to smile as they close the book and feel like, they were taken on a ride that they wanted to be on, and that they had a great time, and that it ended the way that they wanted it to end. And some might find that limiting, but I absolutely don't, because it's the middle part that's the challenge for life and for writing. It's bringing the journey these characters are on and taking my readers on that same journey that is really the challenge, even though they know it's going to be a happy ending at the end. But basically, I just have to kind of work it out sometimes. I know, like I said, I try to figure out the turning points, and usually every book has 3 to 4 turning points, in the relationship or in the character's development, where they have to figure out, the way that they're living. First, they have to figure out the way they're living is not making them happy, or the way that they've been, or the decision that they've made, or whatever, is not the route to happiness. And then, they have to make small steps towards being able to make a change in their life, a lasting change in their life.
In this book, the title, The Path to Sunshine Cove, the path is an important element in this book. It was to me, the path down to the ocean.
Very much so, and I loved the way that title came out. I don't always get to pick my titles, and I didn't in this case. I picked Sunshine Cove, but I loved that they added the path, because that is such an important part of the story.
Yes, it really is, and I love it that you have each chapter is it focuses on one of your characters too. To me, because I said at the beginning, this is a page turner, and it was, because you want to know what's going to happen. You just got to know.
Oh, I love hearing that. It makes me so happy, and that's exactly the journey I hope that my readers take out of it. That they want to keep reading. That's, and I always say the ending of this book, the beginning sells this book, the ending sells the next book. So I try to write an ending that my readers will say, oh.
In this book, all the characters were likable and sympathetic. Do you ever write unsympathetic characters?
I do. Sometimes you need a character who is sort of a catalyst for change in the other people. I don't write a lot of like terrible villains. I should say I did spend probably the first third of my career I wrote romantic suspense, so there was always a bad person who was adding to the plot there, because there was always crime and bad people doing bad things. But as I've sort of transitioned in my career, I don't have a lot of really, I try not to write really miserable characters, although sometimes I do, and usually if I do, it's like in this particular case, the sisters had parents who were not the greatest, and so they, in a way, are the catalyst for change that these sisters needed, because they were, it was a difficult relationship. They had a domineering father and a kind of a mother who didn't protect them, not necessarily physical abuse, but definitely emotional abuse from their father. And so, those were the bad people and the unlikable people, but they're gone now. And so it's these sisters' choice at this point, whether they let that affect the rest of their life or whether they, realize that that's in the past and they can't control that and they need to move on and find happiness where they are.
Right. And the reason that you want to keep reading to find out, it's not only so much what happens next, you want to find out what happened, because you're very good at dropping these little hints about this trauma in their past without giving away very much about what was really going on. And so it's like, well, what did happen to their parents? What made this, these girls, we find out pretty early that they were separated as teens, and one went into a foster home and the other went into a girls' home. Why did they do that? And yeah.
Well, I had the two ideas. The one with the woman who helped people clean out their houses, and that was actually originally what the idea was. What if this terrible violent past, and I don't want to go into it too much for readers, but they did have, it's a very difficult situation and maybe unexpected from the hints that I tried to drop, that it wasn't exactly what people thought it might have happened. It was the little flip side of that from what they thought might have happened to them. But yeah, and I know, I do think many people have childhood traumas. I was actually listening to something about that on the radio this morning about there are certain childhood traumas that have lasting impact on people's lives, and that's kind of unavoidable. It's not unavoidable that every child has trauma, but when you do have trauma as a child, it's going to have an impact on you as an adult. And I do find it interesting how two people can share the same experience but come away from it very different. And that was sort of the idea that I wanted to explore, is why did they take it in different ways? Certainly in their particular case, Rachel, the younger sister, was taken in foster care. She was in a home and she had a loving family that cared for her after their parents were out of the picture, and Jess did not. And so obviously that was going to have an impact on both of them. The fact that they were separated when they had been so close through their teenage years and their childhood, and Jess really wanted to be able to have the opportunity to take care of her sister, but she had to accept that her sister was in a good place, in a better place than she would have been had Jess taken her and they lived together with an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old in a horrible apartment. That was what the only future Jess could have provided to her sister, and she had to realize that her sister was much better off in this town of Cape Sanctuary with a loving family. And, that obviously was traumatic for Jess because she loved her sister and she wanted to take care of her. So that was the second trauma that she had to deal with beyond what had happened with their family. So, of course, she's much more withdrawn and she doesn't want to put down roots and she doesn't want to let people in because she's a little more scarred. Whereas Rachel, who has created this picture of a perfect life and has, really tried hard to build this family that she wanted to show that to the world. She's a social media influencer and has, she loves to create beautiful cookies and show her lovely interior and have parties that everybody wants to go to and that sort of thing. But then her kind of worldview is shaken again when her youngest son is diagnosed with autism, and she has to realize that, or as being on the spectrum anyway, and she has to realize that the future is going to be a lot more uncertain, that she can't control every aspect of her life, and that sometimes, the trick in life is figuring out that even when difficult things happen, you can still make a beautiful life out of it. When it's not exactly how you pictured it, it can still be beautiful.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is RaeAnne Thayne, author of The Path to Sunshine Cove. So, RaeAnne, why don't you read a little bit from the book for us?
Okay, I would be glad to. So I have chosen actually a scene that's chapter 3, and it's not in Jess's point of view. Jess is kind of the main heroine, but I liked the scene in Rachel's point of view, and so I thought I would read that, if that's all right. And I didn't time it, so I'm going to try to not go too long. You might have to cut me off if I keep rambling. So.
No worries.
All right, so this is Rachel. For the love of Christopher Robin, can you please give me 5 more minutes? That's all I need, 5 minutes. I'm starving, her 5-year-old daughter Ava whined, just as if she hadn't finished a mozzarella stick and several apple slices a half hour earlier. If I don't eat something, I'm going to die. Can I have one of your cookies? Eat, her brother Silas echoed the sentiment, if not the words. Rachel Clayton McBride closed her eyes and released a heavy breath to keep from snapping back. She dredged up a calm smile. Give me 5 more minutes and I will be done taking pictures, I promise. Then I can make you some macaroni and cheese. I don't want macaroni and cheese. I want a cookie. Of course she did. If Rachel had said she would give her a cookie, Ava would have said she was in the mood for macaroni and cheese. She was in training for the debate Olympics, apparently. I don't need a cookie, Mama, her older daughter Grace said from the kitchen table in a prim voice that seemed out of place in a 7-year-old girl. She knew her oldest well enough to be quite certain Grace would quickly change her tune if Rachel did start doling out cookies to Grace's younger siblings. That wasn't going to happen with these particular cookies. She'd worked too hard on them to see them gobbled up by little mouths that wouldn't appreciate the nuances of flavor. Grace, could you please grab a granola bar for Ava and Silas? I don't want a granola bar, Ava whined. I want one of those. It's purple and pretty. Ava pointed to the tray of perfectly decorated almond sugar cookies Rachel had been working on all afternoon. I told you when we were making them. These are for my book group tonight. I made some for only us, and you can have one after dinner. But they're so pretty. Why can't I have one now? Ava whined. Because you can't. It was the worst sort of maternal response, but she was just about out of patience for the day. Undeterred, Silas reached on tiptoe for one, but still couldn't reach. If she hadn't been focused on the photographs for her blog and social media properties, she might have seen the telltale signs of a tantrum. The jutted out lip, the rising color, the obstinate jawline. He grunted and tried to reach. See, Silas wants one too, Ava informed her. Daddy would give us one. I'm sure he would, but Daddy's not here right now, is he? All right, she was heading straight on into full-on bitch mode. It wasn't Ava's fault that her father seemed to be spending more and more time working these days. She wanted to think it was simply an uptick in the construction business that had him leaving before sunrise and coming home after dark most days. As the owner of a successful roofing company, her husband had plenty of obligations outside the home, which meant most of the work inside the home fell on Rachel's shoulders. She hoped work was the reason Cody was gone so much anyway, and that he wasn't trying to avoid the hard realities of home life, especially their son's early diagnosis of autism 2 months earlier. When Cody was home, he seemed distracted, as if he couldn't wait to be somewhere else, anywhere else. She shoved down the low, constant thrum of anxiety to focus on her children. A granola bar or nothing, she told Ava. Those are your choices until dinner. Silas, you can't do that. No, play with your car on the floor. As she might have expected, her son ignored her. She might as well have been talking to one of those flower-shaped cookies. He continued driving his car along the edge of the island. At least he hadn't had a meltdown over not getting a cookie. Rachel decided to focus on the positive as she took a few more shots of 2 cookies on a piece of antique china she had picked up at a thrift store. This would make a beautiful post about spring baking when she shared the recipe on her blog, she thought. Her phone rang with Cody's distinctive ringtone, a jazz song they had danced to on an amazing trip to Sonoma for their anniversary some years ago. She was quite certain she had conceived Silas on that trip. Even though doctors had told her it wasn't the case, Rachel still wondered whether Silas's autism was a result of all the wine she had consumed in between magical afternoons spent making love. Hi, she said breathlessly. Oh, how she missed sex. It had been weeks for one reason or another. Hey, babe, I'm going to be late again. I'm sorry. I'm down 2 guys, and the job is taking longer than we thought. It's supposed to rain overnight, and we can't leave the Tanners with a hole in the roof. Again? You promised you would be home on time tonight. I have my book group, remember? Rachel had been holding on desperately to the idea of a little adult conversation. Okay, most of the time her group rarely actually managed to make time to discuss the book. It was more about drinking wine and having a discussion that didn't involve her wiping someone's nose or telling someone else to stop jumping on the furniture. Oh, I completely forgot about book group. Maybe my mom would sit with the kids until I get home. He could remember the batting average of every single hitter on the Giants lineup, but didn't bother to remember the one night a month when she could pretend to have a life outside her kids. Your mom will be at the book group. I can't ask her to miss it to tend my kids. So will your sister and Jan. Those were about the only people she dared entrust with all 3 of her children, especially considering Silas's behavior issues. What time is it over? I should be able to wrap things up here and leave the rest of the guys the job to the guys so I can be home by 8. You would only be a little late. Don't bother. It's fine. Finish the job. No, I'll see what I can do. I don't want you to miss boot group. You said it yourself. You can't leave the Tanners with a hole in their roof with rain in the forecast. Do what you need to do. I'll be fine. I'll do what I can, he repeated. I've got to go. Love you. It sounded so practiced, so casually offhand that she suddenly wanted to cry. Bye, she said, tapping her wireless earbud to end the call. She stared into space, aching inside for everything that had gotten in the way of the vast love they used to share. She was distracted from her grim thoughts by a clatter and matching squeals from the girls. When she whirled around, she found Silas and Ava standing over her tray of beautiful sugar cookies, now a jumble of broken glass, crumbs, and frosting all over the floor. An entire day of work. She had been working on them all day and had finally perfected the lavender-infused icing. Look what you've done, she exclaimed. The stress of the day chasing kids seemed to pour over her like water, gushing over the cliffs to the ocean. I'm sorry, Mommy, Ava said, tears dripping. We didn't mean to ruin your cookies. I was only trying to look at one when you were on the phone. Only look. And Silas grabbed it, and the whole tray fell down. They were so pretty. Grace just wandered over to look at the disaster with a mournful look. Now they're trash. Should I clean them up and throw them away? Grace was being helpful, she knew, but Rachel still couldn't like the way her daughter was always so eager to throw away anything that wasn't perfect, whether it was a coloring page where she went outside the line or a toy with a broken piece. Silas sat down and picked up a cookie piece from the floor. Before Rachel could stop him, he popped it into his mouth. Silas, stop. Don't eat that. There's glass. He looked at her, barely acknowledging she was there, and picked up another broken cookie to eat. She wasn't even sure he would notice if he ate glass. His reaction to things were sometimes so far out of the realm of what most people would consider normal. He would hold his hand under hot water without making a sound, but have a complete meltdown if she left a tag on his shirt that bothered him. No, she said again, and swooped around the kitchen island to pick him up and physically move him out of harm's way. As she might have expected, Silas didn't like that. He wriggled to get down, grunting his displeasure at her. You'll hurt yourself on glass, she said. He started banging his head back against her, something new and fun he had recently discovered. Stop, she ordered. How did he manage to wriggle his body and buck his head like that at the same time? Sometimes keeping him from danger was like wrestling an angry baby alligator. She finally managed to restrain him and calm him a little when the doorbell rang, starting him up again. I'll get it. Ever helpful, Grace sailed to the front door before Rachel could remind her they didn't always have to answer the door every time it rang. Great, just what she needed, someone to witness what a disaster she was making of her life. Silas continued to fight so that he could be free to eat sugar-coated broken glass, while Ava sat on the floor sobbing quietly, though Rachel couldn't tell whether she was crying because of what she and her younger brother had done or because of the cookies she could no longer eat. She almost forgot the doorbell had rung until she heard a whoop of excitement out of Grace. A moment later, the last person she expected to see that day walked into the kitchen. Jess, her older sister. Jess, who lived a rambling life and was usually on the other side of the country. Jess, who hadn't given her one single whiff of warning that she might be coming to Cave Sanctuary. Her sister surveyed the chaos of broken cookies and upset children with the impassive expression she always seemed to wear whenever she was around Rachel and her family. Looks like I've come at a bad time. Aunt Jess, Ava exclaimed, her tears miraculously dried as she launched herself at her aunt, who hugged her with a little laugh. Rachel couldn't seem to stop staring. I'm going to stop there.
That's a perfect place to stop. And that was RaeAnne Thayne reading from The Path to Sunshine Cove. So you'd mentioned, that part of the kind of basic idea for this book was Jess's business of helping people, not necessarily elderly, but often elderly people, clear out their homes. Is this a common thing, a service that, do you know anyone? Did you talk to anyone who's done this?
Well, I didn't actually talk to anyone who's done it, but I have researched it, and there are companies who do this. I had heard that initial ad on the radio for a company that was their job. They said they'll go in and help, sometimes senior citizens, but again, it doesn't have to be. But I got the idea. My parents both died within a few weeks of each other, about, I want to say 6 years ago. And so my siblings and I had to clean out their house. And I just thought, what a great career it would be for somebody who, if you go in and you take the things you want and you just leave the rest to somebody else to come and clear out, that would be so freeing for children who have to go in and clean out after their parents. And so in this particular case, the client is a woman whose husband died a year ago. She's still coming to terms with her grief, but has realized that the house that she's lived in their whole married life, and that actually he had been raised in and his parents had lived in, was cluttered. And it's a beautiful home, but it's cluttered and needed a refresh, and so she hires Jess to come to this town of Cape Sanctuary and basically clean out her house, whether that's to sell it someday or what. She's not quite sure what she wants to do with it. She just knows that there's too much stuff and she wants to get rid of some of the stuff. So I just think it would be a really interesting job, especially, again, for someone like Jess who doesn't want to settle anywhere. She has an Airstream trailer. She hooks the Airstream up to her truck and moves on to the next job, helping someone out. And so, there's certainly more of a need for that, I think.
Yeah.
More people have to sort of downsize and figure out that, they can't live in the house that they're in anymore and they need a senior apartment or whatever.
And one of the great benefits is she knows which things she can recognize which things might have value to sell. She has ideas for donating things. So it isn't just putting everything in a dumpster.
No, right. And I think that's she feels her job is to help people realize what's important to them, the things that they want to keep, which is, again, as we were going through my parents' house, was one of the most difficult things, is figuring out, yes, this has had great significance to my parents, but does it mean anything to us now in these days, and is it something that our children might like or whatever, and just kind of allocating where things go. That was difficult. And obviously we saved all the pictures and things like that, and each of us went through and picked out the things that meant things to us, but at some point you're left with everything else and you have to figure out how do we take care of this.
Yeah. Mom, you know a lot about that too, don't you?
Yes.
You're of the generation, I think, and Grandma was too, where you felt like you had to keep everything that was your parents. And so my grandmother, Mom's mom, had many, many things from both sides of the family, and there's some fascinating, really interesting historical items in that whole bunch, but it ends up being a lot. And I can tell you, when it gets to, probably the buck is stopping with me, because my kids are not going to take it. I can almost guarantee you.
Right. And in this particular case, Eleanor didn't want her son to have to go through everything and figure it out. She didn't want her son to have to make all those decisions. And so she decided proactively that she was going to make the decisions while she was still around to do it. Her husband died quite quickly he'd been ill just for a short time from the cancer that he had. It actually had been about a few years, and she'd been so busy taking care of him that she hadn't had time to think about those things. But she doesn't want her son to have to be the one to make the decisions, and so that's the reason that she hired Jess to help her.
Now, in the Path to Sunshine Cove, both Jess and Nate have military backgrounds. Is this something that is common in your characters?
Not necessarily. It made sense for them in their particular story to have military backgrounds. I have written before about some who do, and I do have a couple family members. I have a brother who was a pilot in the Air Force, and I have another brother who's a brother-in-law who's a major in the Army Reserve. He's my go-to source when I need military help for things.
That was my next question is, how do you research what's realistic in those situations?
Yeah, he's my go-to source. So we actually, every question that I had about the military, I sort of kept it out, in a file, and then we sat down and I said, okay, now what would they do in this case? How long would she legitimately be in the Army, before she got out and things. And some of that came from, I wanted her father to be this kind of overbearing person, but I also wanted them to move around a lot as a child so that she never had in her life an opportunity to put down roots. And so that made sense. Military was the perfect environment for that, and I think that the question there was, and it was raised by my editor, would she go in the military having this father that had been in the military? But I think, what I came away with as I researched with my brother-in-law is that, it does happen a lot out of foster care when people don't have a lot of options financially. They come out of foster care and they don't have money and they don't have, don't have a purpose really at that point in her life. She didn't quite know what to do. And so the military does become an option. And also, I wanted to convey that she had known many people in the military who were not like her father. And so it wasn't that she knew that she was going to go and deal with a bunch of people like her father, because she had known people who were not like that.
Right, right. And, it seems like you deal with a lot of kind of serious issues in your book. And, even though you may, like you said, this isn't strictly romance. And so there's a lot of things going on. There's the aging process. There's the dealing with a child on the spectrum, caring for a child on the spectrum. Dealing isn't the right word, but is it important to you to put these sort of serious themes in your writing?
It is, mainly because it comes back to my core message that, we're all going to deal with pain in our life. It's inevitable. It's part of life. I can walk around I'm very close to the people in my neighborhood, and I could walk through my neighborhood, and every house I know someone has suffered loss of a child or a divorce or something that caused them pain, but the trick of life is figuring out how to move forward in the midst of this pain to still realize that life can be joyful. You can help other people. You can still be kind. You can still form these connections, and that life is rich and beautiful when you do realize that you can't do all this by yourself, that when you live on an island, you're not going to have as full or as rich of a life experience as you would if you can let other people inside.
Very true, very true. I was wondering, do you in any of your books historical novels?
I have not written any historical novels. I should say they're my favorite to read, and maybe that's why I haven't actually tried to write one, because I don't want to lose that escape. And I think if I started writing them, then I'd read those novels with a much more analytical eye than I do now, where I can pick up a historical novel and just dive into it and just escape into that world. Whereas it'd be more like research if I were actually writing a historical novel. So I don't want to lose that. And I like the world that I write, and I like writing about contemporary issues and people dealing with the things that I see my neighbors dealing with and my friends dealing with.
No, that's life. Everybody has issues. Let's face it. Nobody's perfect. Right. And I'm a nobody, so I'm probably perfect.
Very funny, Mom.
I have a classmate that's his favorite line, and I get a kick out of it every time I talk to him. That's what he says. So
nobody's perfect, and I'm nobody.
That's wonderful. Wow.
Yeah. Now, you've received a number of awards for your writing and been on a number of best-selling lists. So let's see. We've got the New York Times, the Publishers Weekly, and what else? I know I saw some others.
USA Today.
USA Today. So how long were you writing before you started making the lists?
Really, I hit the New York Times for the first time in 2013. I'd hit USA Today maybe 2 or 3 years before that, but the New York Times was not until 2013. And it was really, in light of the conversation we've already had, I can share this. It was really an emotional time for me because, as I mentioned, my parents had died within a few weeks of each other, and my mom died unexpectedly in September of 2013, and my dad had Parkinson's, and he was put on hospice just a few weeks later and died just a few weeks after that. So, and then I hit the New York Times the Wednesday after my dad passed away. So having lost them both within a month,
wow.
or, just a very short time, and then hitting this career milestone was just a very, very strange time. I can remember after my agent called to tell me, I burst into tears because I wanted to call my parents, first of all, of course, because I knew how my mom was such a reader. She's who introduced me to books, and that was just I so wanted to tell her. They were so thrilled with my career and thrilled to have a daughter who was a writer. But I still I felt them there. I know they celebrated with me where they are, and it was still my sister. I have a close family of siblings, and they celebrated with me and sort of filled that void of not having my parents there to share that with. But yeah, so it sort of did put into perspective that yes, I had reached this milestone that I've been trying for many years as a writer, but not having my parents there sort of made me put it in perspective and realize it's just another thing to put on my bio. It's not that. To me, the importance is being able to tell the stories that I want to tell and make people happy and reach people's hearts. That's more important to me than hitting any lists.
Well, which book did it, and what was different about that one?
The book was Christmas at Snowflake Canyon. And I do feel like at that time it was one of my best books. I had really worked hard on that particular book. I think it was like book 5 in a series that was much more interconnected than this particular series is. And so I think as each book came out, the readership sort of grew, and then people wanted to read about these particular characters. And so, what puts a book on the list is that velocity of sales in the first few weeks of release. And so it was Christmas time. Christmas books always sell quite well. At least my Christmas books do. And then it was, again, because it was like the 5th book in a series, people who had started reading at book 1 wanted to finally get to this particular book. And so I guess that's all I can say. But I should say that just almost every book since then has hit the New York Times. So at some point you do just get a readership that they want to read your books. And that's a wonderful thing. I love my readers.
And is that the hardcover?
No,
list,
it was a mass market. It was mass market paperback when they used to have a mass market paperback list. And they stopped that in, I want to say, 2017. So all of my books after that, almost all my books, I think, after that, hit that mass market list. Now my books typically will hit the combined list the week of release if it's a trade or a mass market. But the hardcovers are a little bit harder to squeak on, so I haven't yet hit on the hardcover list. But then when the book is reprinted into paperback, I usually hit the monthly mass market list that comes out.
So it's sort of like old hat for you now.
Yeah, yeah. Not old hat. It's still always exciting. It's always a thrill when a book gets the New York Times. But again, like I said, in light of things, it's more about the fact. To me, it means more that more and more readers are finding my books. That's more significant to me than any, list. The fact that means that more people are feeling like they want to buy my book as soon as it comes out, which is really valuable to me.
Now, looking at your list of books on your website, they're set in a lot of different places, although it seems to be mostly rural, not urban. I don't see any urban settings for you, but is that a deliberate choice?
Yes, I live in a small town, and so small town books are sort of where my heart is, just because I do. Again, I live in a town that's not very big, and I know most of my neighbors, and that's my life experience. Although I should say I did grow up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is quite a big community. So I do know some of at least until I was 13, I lived there. But I like that feel of small towns. I'm not to say I'm never going to write a big city book, because I'm sure that someday I will. There will probably come an idea to me that is, but I like creating fictional towns, and it's much easier to create a fictional small town than it is to create a big city somewhere.
That is true. That is true. And how do you research the locales?
A lot of internet. I considering that I started out in the 90s before we had the internet.
Pre-internet.
Yeah, I used to have to I can remember writing to chambers of commerce saying, "Can you please send me everything about your town? I want to set a book there." But now it's much easier. I can just go in and look up pictures, and I keep a file with pictures of what I imagine. And usually, although I create fictional towns, they're usually sort of based on real places that I've been. And for instance, Cape Sanctuary, I took 2 of my favorite places. One is the Monterey Pacific Grove area in California, and one is Cannon Beach, Oregon. And I sort of mashed them together and put them in Northern California, just kind of plopped it down in a place that is sort of near Trinidad, California. And I just sort of came up with what I would like this ideal city to be. I've written another series called Hope's Crossing, and that was the series I was talking about before that was interconnected. It ended up being 7 interconnected books. And that one is loosely based on Park City, Utah, which is not that far from where I live. and I go there frequently. And so it was a ski town, basically. I just kind of took the things I know about Park City and created a fictional town in Colorado. And then another series I've written is called Haven Point, and that was a spin-off of Hope's Crossing, where one of there's a family that has many children, and one of those children ends up going to this town of Haven Point, and that is loosely based on a place called McCall, Idaho, which is on a lake, and I needed a lake, a big lake community, and so that's where that one is based.
Now, see, I was hoping you would say that you had to make tax-deductible research trips to every single location.
I do try to go places when I'm writing about it. I don't always get there. In fact, I haven't been to Northern California in a long time, and so I need to make a trip. But then COVID hit, and so I didn't get there.
Well,
but
obviously
I
that
do love
changed
to travel.
everything.
I do love to travel, and so I do. We've been to Cannon Beach many times. I've been to Monterey, California many times, and if I were to go again, I would say, this is research. I need to be here.
Absolutely. So, Mom, do you have any last questions? We're about out of time.
No, I don't, but I just want to say that I certainly enjoyed this book, and I know that many people will, because a book that has a happy ending. I'm going to be a spoiler and say it does have a happy ending.
But anyone who knows her books knows that anyway.
They know. They know that's what they're going to get at the end. It's going to be happy. Well, thank you so much. It was a delight to speak with both of you.
And, Mom, do you have a closing quote for us?
Yes, I do. Just a second. This actually is from the book, the last line in the epilogue, and it's perfect. No matter how difficult the road they traveled, the way was made easier and certainly more beautiful because of the loved ones who helped them along the way. And that can be true of any of us.
Right.
Well, thank you, RaeAnne. Thank you, Mom. And see you all next week on Writers' Voices.
Thank you so much.